Open Source Software by Ryan Cahalane. The Open Source Initiative defines itself as a global nonprofit. The Open Source Initiative, or OSI for short, protects and promotes open source, while championing open source in society through education, collaboration, and infrastructure, stewarding the open source definition, and preventing abuse of the open source concept. The Open Source Initiative defines open source as software that can be freely used, changed, and shared in modified or unmodified form by anyone. This typically refers to a software's source code. It can be shared, downloaded, and modified freely by anyone in the world. You would be surprised to find how much of what you use today is based off of open source software. Google's Android and Chrome software are both based off open source. And according to Facebook engineer Jordan DeLong, Facebook is built on open source from top to bottom and could not exist without it. Facebook has been contributing to open source code for about 10 years now, making it one of the longest backers of open source software. Many businesses are finally realizing that open source is good for them, and they are fully embracing it. Open source offers greater flexibility and freedom in the software that they use. It is also much cheaper than developing proprietary software. Linux is a computer operating system based entirely off of open source software that thousands of people around the world contribute to. Linux is one of the largest examples of open source software collaboration. Since its creation, Linux has been written into more computer hardware platforms than any other operating system. It is also the leading operating system on many large servers, mainframes, and supercomputers. According to the Open Source Initiative, open source is not just defined by access to the source code, but there are also 10 criteria that must be met in order to be identified as open source software. The first criteria mentioned is free distribution. The license for the source code cannot restrict the code from being sold or shared with anyone, nor can the license require a fee for any sale. The second criteria is the source code. The open source software must have the source code available or easily available elsewhere for free of charge. The source code cannot be deliberately obscured. The third criteria is derived works. To be considered open source, the license must allow for other works to be derived from the original software and its code. An example of a derived work is Google Chrome. It is derived from Project Chromium. The fourth criteria, integrity of the author's source code, states that licenses may restrict distribution of source code only if the license allows for the distribution of patch files. Criteria 5 states that a license may not discriminate against any person or groups. For example, the license cannot state that anyone of Chinese heritage or any American company cannot use the source code. It must also be available to everyone everywhere in the world. The sixth criteria states that a license cannot discriminate against any fields of endeavor. For example, licenses may not restrict the use of code for stem cell research. Criteria 7 deals with the distribution of license. All rights attached to the program must also be applied to anyone that the program is distributed to, not just the original licensee. The 8th criteria states that a license must not be specific to a product. To be distributed, the program cannot be limited to a specific product. It must be made available to all. An example of this would be licenses that state software is only available for Dell laptops and not Asus laptops. The 9th criteria states that a license must not restrict other software. For example, a license cannot say that all other code in the program be open source, or that its code can be the only open source code involved in the software. The final criteria says that the license must be technology neutral. The license cannot have any provision stating that the software can be only used for certain technologies, like iOS or Android. The Open Source Initiative protects and promotes open source. It champions the open source definition, which includes 10 different criteria. The OSI defines open source as software that can be freely used, changed, and shared in modified or unmodified form by anyone, anywhere in the world.